you guys for sticking around. How does this work? Is there someone?
There is.
Okay.
I can point people up.
Sure.
Okay. Questions? Yes, sir.
How did you get such unbridled access to Kink.com?
You know, that's actually a really good question. You know, James had the idea of doing this film. We'd approached Peter Ackworth at Kink, and we were met with actually a not insignificant amount of resistance at first. They'd had someone come in to try to do a reality TV series there, and I actually saw a test of that, and that was one of the things that made me say, I don't like these people, I don't want to make a film about them. And then I realized it was just because it was so like disastrously manipulated, and everyone at Kink who'd been part of that project that never aired or nothing ever came of felt like they'd been very much misrepresented and pitted against each other. And you know, shockingly, reality TV isn't real, you know. So, so they were resistant, and when I went to meet with them and I met with the directors, I said, look, we're going to be very unobtrusive. We subscribe to a very sort of Maisels-esque philosophy of shooting. We're not going to try to direct anything. We're just going to watch, and that if somebody doesn't want to be on camera, they're not going to be on camera. So I made a bunch of tags that said, "Don't shoot me." The first day I showed up at the Armory, and on the first day about 45 people were wearing them. And by the end of the shoot, which was only a month, there was only one person in the building that would wear one, and that was because she hadn't told her family what she did for a job, and she was worried that they would find out. So the access came as we went along, and as trepidatious as I was walking in there about what I would find, they were equally a little bit suspect of me, and the more time that we spent, and the more that they saw that we didn't have an agenda, they were wonderful in opening up, and I'm so grateful to them. They were here for the premiere on Saturday, and it was pretty amazing to have them all here in Park City, because the film is very much because of them and because of the trust that they gave to me.
In the center there.
There was a lot of going back and forth between showing scenes and showing the dialogue, showing the reactions of the filmmakers, of the production people involved in the production, and then there were times that sort of mixed the two, and it seemed that there was a hesitancy in the cinematography of whether you're sort of drawn towards the sexuality of the scene and trying to at the same time show it as a documentary, a piece of a kind of documentary. Somewhat educate whoever the audience is going to be. Did you find it hard trying to find a middle ground between getting sexy enough without making it more smutty than documentary?
Yeah, I mean, it was a delicate balance. We shot like 115 hours of footage, and each of these directors does 3 shoots a week, and each of those shoots are about 6 hours long. So you have plenty of time to get different types of coverage, and that's kind of what we did. Our MO from the beginning was shoot the people making the porn, don't shoot the porn, because if you want to see the porn, you can go onto their website and do just that, and that's not what we were trying to do. But we approached it, I think, on a scene-by-scene basis, because we had given ourselves options while we shot it. It allowed us to go into each scene and say, what do we really need to see here in order to understand what's going on? And if there was something graphic that didn't lend itself to the telling of the story, there wasn't really any need to put it in there. At the same time, we weren't going to shy away from, I mean, some of my favorite moments in the film are, you know, it's like full frontal nudity, but it's not necessarily sexual, like the scene early on with Madeline that she's coaching, you know, the guy who's actually from like the very much vanilla porn industry and had never really done a shoot at Kink, didn't really know like how he was going to respond to it. There's some really wonderful, funny moments in that you'd miss if you were trying to hide, you know, his physicality. But I think we tried to it was on a case-by-case basis. And I think as I've watched it here, it's very, very different to watch it in a room full of 200 people than it is at home. It's like, I turned to James during the premiere, I'm like, it's funny. You know? I didn't know it was funny. So it's been interesting gauging audiences' reactions too, as I'm watching it, and I feel like we've managed to avoid it ever including anything that was not lending itself to the story.
Red sweater.
As a director, talking to the director, do you have any
No, actually, you know, we had 3 camera teams going. It was myself and 2 other cinematographers, and the most important part of preparing for this film was really picking the people to be who were going to shoot this and do sound on this, that they were people who were non-judgmental and also able to disappear. And I think that worked for the most part. And I think that, I mean, the only thing I can think of, actually, ironically, is after we shot the scene with Donna, Princess Donna, where she has to reconfigure for the model. She came to me at the end of the day and she's like, God, that was a terrible shoot. I really hope you don't put that in the movie. And we did like 4 other shoots with her, and then at the end, and she's not surprisingly like, she knows what she wants. And she came to me at the end of the whole shoot and she said, okay, you've got plenty of content. You're not going to put that shoot in the movie, right? Because it was a disaster. And I was like, I was like, I'm going to put in the movie what belongs in the movie. And I did, and she came up to me after seeing it. She said, I'm actually really glad you put that in the film. So I think that was her trying to direct the director moment, but I think it worked out exactly the way it should have. So.
Right here.
I have 2 questions. I was wondering what inspired James to create this film, and then I was also wondering about the term model. Why do you think Kink uses model as opposed to actor?
I'll answer the second question first. They actually use model and talent interchangeably. You tend to hear model more in the film. And I think it has something to do with the idea that is broached in the film of sort of trying to seek a certain kind of authenticity and not really wanting their performers to be performing. Obviously, I think that's a slightly complicated thing, and I think you see different arguments for and against that philosophy in the film, but in general, it's something that they're not looking for actors per se. They're looking for people to experience what they are doing. In terms of the advent of the film, you know, James had shot for a day on the film about Cherry and called me up and told me about this place and thought it was fascinating and thought the juxtaposition of the energy on screen and the content that they were creating versus the energy off screen and the vibe on set while they were creating that content was a really fascinating one. And so for me, I ended up, you know, I went up with one of our producers, Miles Levy, and took a meeting up there, and I think walked into that building pretty sure I wasn't going to make this movie, and walked out absolutely sure that I was. And part of that was because I was forced to come to terms with how much baggage I was carrying around with me about what I thought porn was and what I assumed the business was like, and the fact that most of that had come from the way I'd seen it portrayed in fiction films. And I mean, we struggled a lot with whether we take the film outside the context of the Armory and bring in voices outside of those walls, and then decided that this is really just a portrait of a specific place and a specific group of people. I'm no expert on the porn industry. I'm sure that there are plenty of terrible pornographers and plenty of wonderful pornographers and people who get into the business for the right reason and people who get into the business for the wrong reason. So this is just a portrait of a very small selection of people who do this for a living in a massive field that is not a monolith and that, as Tomcat mentions, there are a million different pieces of.
Right there.
Being that this is such a perceptively dark world, did you find anything while you were shooting that even you couldn't stomach, but you maybe didn't put in the film, or that you did put in the film?
Actually, it kind of worked out backwards. I mean, when I was doing my research and reading about the sites that the different directors did, I basically said off the bat, like, I was like, I can't shoot Donna's shoots. Like, I don't think I can handle watching a gangbang. Like, I don't think, I'm going to send one of the guys in for that. And actually, with one of my other cinematographers, Kim Parker, is a woman, and Dave Malore was actually the boyfriend of Jesse Lee, the head of the talent department. So he knew a lot of the people there, and he knew them outside of their work zone. And so I said to the 2 of them, look, do you feel comfortable? I said to Kim, do you feel comfortable shooting this? Because especially as a woman, that stuff can be really, really hard to watch. It's hard for me to watch in a fiction film, you know. And what ended up happening was over the course of the time that we were there, once you start to get the vibe between people, the reality shifts. So by the end of the shoot, when I would shoot Donna's scenes, you know, it's not the fantasy that you see created on film. It's like these guys who've been working together for 5 years and they're all buddies and 2 of them are roommates, and like the model has decided like which 3 guys she wants to be there, and it's like this dark sexual theater troupe, you know, and they're like hanging out and joking, and there's a great scene that's not in the film where, you know, there's some, like, one of the guys is on his iPhone and there's some posting about NBA trades, and like the girl's like tied up to the bed, spread eagle, and the guys are standing around trying to stay hard, and they're like, oh dude, crazy NBA trades, and the model pops her head up and she's like, who? You know, and everyone starts talking about basketball, and Donna walks in, she's like, guys, we gotta shoot in 2 minutes. Are you hard? Are you ready? Fuck basketball, you know? And so like, when you're in that environment, suddenly when you see them performing this thing, it doesn't feel any different than watching a violent scene being performed in an independent film that I'm shooting. I don't know how much of that actually comes across in the film, and I think it's hard. It became harder and harder for us for Ian Olds, our amazing editor, and I to separate ourselves from how this would be received on first viewing because we'd gotten so used to it. But there were things at the beginning that I was scared I wasn't able to shoot. And by the end of the film, there was nothing that I didn't feel comfortable with, because I had come to learn the place and the people and the ethics behind the way that they produce their content, which allowed me to feel comfortable doing it.
In the center there.
What did you and James hope to accomplish with this film, and what kind of audience is marketing?
You know, it's a really good question. I can say this. I have gotten so many emails just since the announcement of this film coming out here, from people I know, from people I don't know, saying, thank you for making this movie. And it was not a response I was at all anticipating. I've had friends from college who, I guess now that I'm the girl who did the porn doc, they feel like they can talk to me about their sex lives in a way that they didn't 15 years ago. And so I'm getting emails from people who are like, Kink, that's my favorite website. And I'm like, really? I'm not sure I needed to know that, but cool. They're awesome guys. So I feel like there are a lot of people for whom this world is very important. And whether it's a huge part of their identity or whether it's a small part of their identity that they are ashamed of, or I think, you know, it's a lot easier to talk about mainstream vanilla porn than it is to talk about being into some of the things, especially some of the extreme things that they do at Kink. So I'm getting the sense that there are a lot of people who really want to see this movie, who want this movie to be seen. This is my first rodeo in terms of, you know, trying to find a home for a film, certainly a film like this. So all I can do is trust that, you know, at the end of the day, I think people really like talking about sex. We just don't feel like we're allowed to a lot of the times, you know? And so if a film like this can encourage a conversation, I mean, pornography is a $1 billion industry, you know? And whether you know, can condone it or you consume it, I think it's important to understand what it is and what it isn't, and that it is and isn't many different things. And there's this hypocrisy about the number of people who watch porn and buy porn, and I think a lot of those people really look down on the people who make it. And it's something that I think we need to struggle with as a culture. You know, why is this thing that is so popular and so essential to us as a society something that you can't respect someone for doing? So I hope it raises questions, and I hope it starts a dialogue.
Yes, over there.
Well, on that note, I really enjoyed the film, but there was one part that I was really curious about was, I forgot her name, but in this film she was the teacher Dom.
Yes.
And it seemed like throughout the film you kind of asked people similar questions, but she was the only person that I think, I don't know if it was you or the person behind the camera asked, you know, what if your children wanted to be in porn? And she spoke of lost souls, and she sort of had her own experience about that, but we didn't hear anybody else speak about that. So I just wondered if you could speak about that moment, because that was the part that really kind of stood out to me as a little bit different, and I was curious about.
Yeah, I think, you know, like in any industry, there are all sorts of different people in pornography. That interview stood out to Ian and I as we were editing, because actually a lot of the people who work at Kink really love working there and are proud of working there. Princess Donna actually came up to me after the screening, and her one issue with the film, I did an interview with her and her mother. And her mother is a scientist and a very brassy, smart woman, and she is tremendously supportive of her daughter and what she has chosen to do as a career. So Donna said, I don't understand why you wouldn't put that scene in to counterpoint what this woman had said. And the answer was twofold. One, we sort of made a concerted effort not to bring anyone else in from outside the walls of the armory. And two, because that was really one of, I think, the most coherent places of touching on the fact that it isn't always amazing and awesome and liberating. That there are people who have been damaged by that industry. There are people who ended up in it for absolutely the wrong reasons. And there are people for whom they feel that they are, creating content that is therapeutic and helpful, and it's a tremendous expression of their own creative vision, and they love it. So it's in there because it does stand out, and it stood out to me, and I thought it was dangerous to create a portrait of this world without raising any questions as to, this is not a puff piece on kink.com. And Peter Ackworth actually said to me, he's like, I think it's smart that was included, because no, it's not always sunshiny, happy, they're doing crazy stuff, and it affects people. And sometimes there are people who get into it that maybe think they're cool with it, and they come out of it, and it's more damaging than they anticipated, or it raises issues in them that they weren't anticipating. So in some ways, I'm glad you think it sticks out, because it stuck out to me as well.
We have time for 2 more questions. In the white sweater.
Could you clarify the mention made by Mr. Ackworth early on about being prohibited from using the term rape and force and the actual enactment of rape?
Yes. One of the things that Kink does, and again, I don't really know the industry worldwide, so I don't know if other sites do this as well, but they do interviews with their talent before and after every scene. And during those interviews, they go through the talent's limits, and they go through what the plan is. You see it actually happen, where the model is asked if she's comfortable with the nature of the scene that they're about to do. So in terms of the way that the billers work, if they were just to put the film up on its own without being bookended by this documentation of the fact that this is in fact a consensual event, their billers would not allow them to do so. Ironically, the reason they put those, front and back end interviews is not just to satisfy the billers. It's actually sort of in its own way their version of the negotiation and aftercare process that happens in BDSM play outside of a pornographic context. So it is a little bit confusing, but it's about the fine print. If they have to say that this is consensual alongside of the scene that doesn't look like it's consensual, or they would not be able to post it.
Last question over there.
You did a great job of showing that this company and the employees are really responsible with the models and with what they do. And you interviewed one model that said, I came from a great home. I'm not this damaged person that is looking for some way to heal myself. Are there times when the employees at Kink feel like somebody has the wrong motives or reasons for wanting to do it, and they actually turn them away?
Yeah, Jessie Lee, the woman who runs the talent office, she mentions it briefly in the film, but they're constantly on the lookout for it. And I think it's a prickly thing, because it's on one part because they're good people and they want the models to, not feel coerced. They want to do things in the right way. There's also legal implications to it, obviously, because what they are doing is so extreme. You need to make sure that the people who are there are doing it because they want to be there, because you can't take the risk of something coming out of it and being like, oh no, I actually didn't mean I was okay with having welts down my back from being flogged for 2 hours. So, and there was a shoot that I was on where they just stopped shooting. They didn't get past the first act because it was so clear that the woman in that specific moment was not, she seemed like she had some other stuff going on. I don't think she was completely sober when she showed up to the shoot, and it was clear that she was not in a position to determine whether or not she should be proceeding in those scenes. I mean, when they talk about, the calling red, directors will do that, especially because when women or men go into subspace, which is this very real, crazy thing to witness, you're no longer necessarily capable of making clear-headed decisions. And it's something that the directors, all the directors there are people who are familiar enough with the physicality of it, having gone through it themselves, that they are, you see it in the woman who's hanging upside down. The director in that scene stops it because he can tell that she's not in a position to call her own safe word at that moment. She's too whacked out by what's going on. And so so they are very, very responsible, not only in terms of the casting, but in looking out for the models as they're going through the scenes, because it's an incredibly intense and mind-altering experience for some of them. So thank you guys so much for staying and for watching. Thank you.
Yeah.